The recording wasn't supposed to exist, and then it did. Marcus stared at the screen, his breath caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat. The timestamp read 12:17 a.m. The file was already saved, already named. That wasn't possible. He hadn't recorded anything yet, but the file sat there, solid and real, with a duration that showed exactly 43 seconds. He reached for the play button with fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else. Static. Then his own voice, speaking words he hadn't said. "Don't open a door." Marcus froze, because he hadn't said that. Not yet. And slowly, very slowly, he turned toward the hallway. But to understand what happened next, you have to understand what came before. Marcus Webb had been working the graveyard shift at Relay Station 7 for almost 3 years. It was a squat concrete building, sitting alone at the end of a gravel spur off County Road 9, surrounded by pine trees on 3 sides and dead grass and flat, dark nothing on the 4th. The kind of place where silence wasn't quiet. It was thick. It was present. His job was straightforward: monitor the broadcast equipment, log signal levels every hour, make sure nothing failed or drifted or threw an error between midnight and 6 in the morning. Most nights, nothing did. Equipment at a relay station was built to run unattended. Marcus was there, technically, as a formality. Insurance, his supervisor had called it during the hiring call. Just someone with eyes on it. But the truth was different. Marcus liked being alone. He had his routines, and his routines had him. Coffee at midnight, made strong and black in the dented aluminum pot that had come with the building and probably predated both of them. Log check at 1 o'clock, full equipment walkthrough at 2, not because anything ever needed checking, but because it gave him somewhere to be during the hard part of the night, the part between 2 and 4. The long, hollow stretch where silence wasn't just silence anymore. It was presence. Then back to the chair, back to the monitors with their slow green rhythms, back to the hum of the fluorescent lights and the creak of the building settling in the cold. He wasn't lonely, he always told himself. He just preferred quiet. He'd been saying that for 3 years. He'd gotten very good at believing it. Tonight started the same as every other night. Marcus arrived at 11:55, 5 minutes early the way he always was, and nodded to Dale on his way out. Dale looked tired in the specific way of someone who'd spent all day doing nothing and still found it exhausting. They exchanged 6 words. "Anything to log?" "Nothing tonight." "See you tomorrow." And then Dale was gone. The door swung shut, and Marcus was alone. He checked the board, everything nominal. He made his coffee and settled into the cracked vinyl chair that had formed itself to the shape of him over 3 years of nightly occupation. He opened his logbook to a fresh page. Outside, through the single window above the equipment bank, the pine trees stood dark and motionless against a sky with no moon, no wind, no sound from the road. The world had gone away and left him to it, as it always did. A bleed. That's the best word for what it was, and Marcus used that word in his own head before he'd even fully registered what he was hearing. Radio people used that word for a specific thing, when a signal from one frequency bled over into another, like ink through wet paper. Interference, atmospherics, equipment drift. There were a dozen explanations for it, and Marcus had heard dozens of bleeds over 3 years, and none of them had meant anything. He noted it in the log, adjusted the filter dial 2 clicks clockwise, went back to his coffee. It came back at 12:29. 12 minutes later, he noted that too, the interval, the duration, the approximate frequency. He turned up the monitor slightly and leaned toward the speaker. It sounded like a voice. Not clearly, not in the way of a voice you could understand, more in the way that wind sometimes sounds like a voice, or the way a crowd heard through walls sounds like a voice. The shape of it was there, the rhythm of human speech, but the content had been stripped out by distance or interference or both. 3 syllables, maybe 4. A rise at the end, like a question. Then silence. 2 seconds later, his coffee mug slid off the edge of the console and shattered on the floor. Marcus stared at it, at the jagged pieces, at the spreading dark stain on the bare concrete. He sat very still for a moment, the way you do when something ordinary happens, but your body hasn't gotten the message yet that it was ordinary. Then he looked up at the monitor, where the signal had already faded back to nothing, and then back down at the mug. The console surface was smooth laminate. The mug had been near the edge. He'd probably nudged it without noticing when he leaned over. Simple physics. Simple and obvious. He cleaned it up, found the other mug in the cabinet under the sink, the plain white one with the chip in the handle, and poured what was left of the coffee into that. He didn't write down what he'd been thinking when the mug fell. That the voice had said something, and then the mug had fallen. He didn't write that down because it wasn't a data point. It was pattern recognition running ahead of itself, which was a thing brains did at 12:30 a.m. in empty buildings, and you didn't log your brain misfiring. He wrote, unidentified bleed signal, 12:17 and 12:29, possible atmospheric monitoring. He told himself he believed it. Most of him did. At 1:04, the signal came back longer, long enough this time that Marcus reached for the recording switch without deciding to. Station protocol required logging any unidentified signal of more than 15 seconds. He hit record and listened. The voice spoke for nearly 20 seconds. He still couldn't make out words. The interference was too heavy, too layered. But the rhythm of it was clearer now. The cadence of sentences, a pause that felt like a breath, the quality of something being explained rather than something being broadcast. Then the overhead light in the equipment bay flickered twice and went out. Marcus sat with his hands on the board and looked at the dark hallway entrance and did not move for several seconds. Then he got up and replaced the bulb. It took 4 minutes. Old fluorescent starter. He kept spares in the utility cabinet because they went out 2 or 3 times a year, and it was always at night when they did it. Nothing unusual, just a bulb. When he came back, the recording was there in the log. He queued it up, put on the headphones, and listened. Heavy static. But underneath it, if you really focused, there was the voice. And in the recording, slowed just slightly by the playback buffer, he could almost hear individual words in the blur. The light. He moved the playhead back, listened again. It goes. Again. Before the... Marcus took the headphones off slowly. He set them on the console. He looked at the hallway, now lit again with its replaced bulb. He looked at the monitors. He looked at the clock. 1:22 a.m. He wrote in his log, recording captured, audio quality insufficient for transcription, recommend follow-up frequency analysis. He didn't write. The voice said the light would go out before the light went out. He sat very quietly for the next 18 minutes and drank his coffee and told himself a series of reasonable things, each one carefully constructed and quite convincing, about coincidence, about expectation, about the way tired minds worked in the small hours. But his hands were shaking, and he couldn't stop writing in his logbook. Not normal observations anymore. Timestamps of every sound, every flicker, every moment when the hum of the building felt like it was paying attention. At 1:47, it came again. And this time, Marcus didn't wait. He leaned toward the speaker immediately. He didn't let himself think about why. The signal was clearer now, clearer than before, as if something had improved on the other end. Adjusted the transmission, tuned the frequency just right to reach him more clearly. The voice was still distorted, but now he could hear, underneath the static, underneath the layering of interference, something else, a pattern, not in the sound itself, but in the rhythm. Pulse, pause, pulse, pulse, pause, over and over. Binary. No, not binary. Something older than that, something more like Morse code or the way a heart beats out a rhythm you feel in your teeth. Marcus stared at the monitor where the signal traced its jagged line across the screen. He noticed something shift. The signal wasn't random anymore. It was responding to him, to the fact that he was listening, to the fact that his breathing had changed. Marcus didn't touch the controls right away. He just watched. The signal was still there, faint, barely holding together, like it could disappear at any moment. He leaned closer to the screen, not because he needed to, but because something in him wanted to. The lines on the monitor shifted, subtle, almost invisible, but not random. They repeated. Marcus frowned, adjusted the display, zoomed slightly. There it was, a pattern. Not numbers, not noise, something else, something intentional. He stared at it longer than he should have, then reached for the logbook. His pen hovered above the page, but he didn't write, because he didn't know what this was. The room felt smaller, not physically, but perceptibly, like the walls had moved just a little closer. Marcus exhaled slowly, forced himself to lean back. "This is nothing," he said out loud. The sound of his own voice felt unfamiliar, too loud, too sharp, as if the room wasn't used to it anymore. He looked at the hallway. Still dark, still empty. But now it didn't feel distant. It felt connected to the signal, to the room, to him. Marcus shook his head, harder this time. No. He turned back to the console, forced himself to focus. Numbers, readings, data, real things. But even as he looked at them, he could feel it. Something watching, not from the hallway, not from the room, from somewhere closer, much closer. The signal pulsed once, then again. And this time, Marcus didn't need to lean in because it felt like it had leaned toward him. He picked up the recording device. He had to document this. His hands moved on their own now, old habit taking over, setting up a continuous recording, adjusting the gain, making sure that whatever was happening, whatever this was, he'd have a record of it. The signal seemed to pulse, like it was pleased, like it was learning what pleased him. At 2:15 it spoke again, and this time, just for a moment, between the layers of static, he heard something he understood. Not a word, but his name. Not said the way a person says a name, but the way a frequency hums when it's tuned to resonate with something specific, the way a tuning fork rings when it recognizes itself. Marcus. He stood up, his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. He didn't remember standing. The early predictions, the small ones, the mug, the light, the door, those weren't me. I need you to understand that. Those were it. It was running tests, seeing if you'd stay, seeing if you'd engage, and I did. I stayed, and I engaged, and by the time I realized what was happening, it had already been in the room with me for hours, and it knew. The static swelled, then came back. It knew everything. It knew my name. It knew my voice. Marcus, it's using your voice right now to do the same thing it did to me. The predictions it gave you tonight, before this signal, before you started recording at 1, those weren't from me. That was it. Learning you. Marcus stood up slowly from his chair. Don't look for it. Don't try to find it or understand it or document it. I know that's what you want to do. I know exactly what you want to do because I wanted to do it too, and I did it. And I am telling you from wherever I am right now that you need to get in your car and leave. Walk out the front door, not the hallway door, the front door. Get in your car and drive. Don't stop for sounds. Don't respond if you hear your name from somewhere it shouldn't be coming from. Don't. The static swelled hard, swallowing the voice for 3 seconds. It's already learned how you breathe, how you move. It does this thing where it gone, then back, much fainter now. I stayed because I thought I could figure it out, because I thought if I could just understand it, just get enough data, I could explain it, or stop it, or at least. The signal collapsed. Pause. The interference alert light went dark. The monitors returned to baseline. The building hummed and buzzed and ticked the way it always did, the way it had every night for 3 years, the way it would go on doing long after Marcus had any say in the matter. He stood in the middle of the room with his pen and his logbook. He looked at what he'd written, his handwriting, his crooked crossbar on his sevens, the way his capital M always leaned slightly left, the specific heaviness of his pen grip that made his letters press deeper on the right side than the left. Things so personal and automatic that he'd never once had to think about them. Things that could only look exactly like that if the hand that wrote them was his. But he'd been standing here, listening. He hadn't written any of this. He'd been listening, and someone, something, had written down every word he would have said if he'd been the one speaking. He read back through the transcript. He read it twice. Then he closed the logbook and left it on the console. He picked up his jacket. He picked up his keys. At 3:02 a.m., the signal stopped, just cut out completely. For the first time in hours, the monitors went silent. The hum of the equipment continued, but the signal was gone. Marcus stood in the middle of the room and didn't move. He'd been standing there for almost 40 minutes. He didn't know how long. Then the speaker crackled, and a voice came through. Not distorted this time. Clear, familiar. It was his voice. But not his voice. Not quite. "Marcus," it said, "if you're hearing this, then you made it this far. That's good. That means you were willing to listen. That means you were willing to stay awake. That means something got through to you, even when you tried to explain it away." The voice paused. "I need you to listen very carefully now, because what I'm about to tell you is important, and I can only say it once, and after I say it, things are going to change. Everything is going to change. You need to understand that. You need to understand that listening to me right now is already part of what it wants you to do. There's something in the building with you. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to describe what it is. I've spent a long time trying to find the right words, and I don't think the right words exist, so I'm just going to tell you what I know. It came in sometime in the first hour of the shift. Not through the door. I checked the door, both of them. They were latched the whole time. I have it in the log. It came in some other way, through the signal, maybe, through the frequency, I don't know. Marcus had stopped writing. He was listening with his whole body. At first, I thought the predictions were just the signal. I thought it was some kind of phenomenon, some atmospheric loop, something that could be explained. I stayed. I tried to document it. That was the mistake. Every time I engaged with it, every time I responded, even just by leaning toward the speaker, even just by picking up the pen, it learned something. It was watching how I reacted. It was calibrating. He walked to the front door, not the hallway door. He remembered that. He put his hand on the push bar, and he stopped. Not because he wanted to, but because from somewhere behind him, from somewhere down the hallway, past the equipment bay, or inside one of the utility rooms he'd walked past 100 times without a second thought, he heard breathing. Not his breathing, not the breathing of his body, which he was very aware of in that moment, which was too fast and too shallow and catching in his throat. The other kind, the patient kind, slow, even, completely calm, coming from somewhere in the dark behind him, like something that had all the time in the world, like something that had already been there longer than he knew. He pushed through the door. The night air hit him, cold, sharp, real. The pine trees stood along the road. The gravel crunched under his feet. His car was where he'd left it. The key went into the lock on the first try. He got and started it. Drove. He drove until the building was gone from his mirrors, and then he kept driving. County roads giving way to state routes, giving way to the highway. The world gradually returning around him. Gas stations, overpasses, the first distant glow of a town. He turned the heat on. He turned the radio off. He drove for a long time before he pulled over. He sat on the shoulder with the engine running and tried to think clearly. He was good at thinking clearly. It was one of the things he liked about himself. He thought about the voice, about the way it had known his name, his writing, the particular sound of his own body in a quiet room. He thought about what it had said. It's been in the room with you for hours. And he tried to work backward from that, tried to remember if there had been any moment in the night when something had felt wrong, before the signal, before he'd started paying attention. He thought about the mug falling. He thought about the voice predicting the mug, 2 seconds before it fell. And then he thought about what the voice had told him, that the early predictions weren't the signal from the future, that something else had made those predictions, that something had spent the first hour of his shift learning what sounds he'd react to, learning what would make him lean forward in his chair and pick up his pen and stay. He stared at the highway for a long time. He never went back to Relay Station 7. The regional supervisor called 3 times before Marcus stopped answering. He found other work, daytime work, work with windows and other people and background noise that was just background noise. Nothing more. He never talked about it, not to anyone. But some nights, not every night, just some, he'd lie awake in the dark and try to reconstruct the timeline, try to figure out how long his future self had been in that building, how long it would take to build a transmitter from relay equipment, to find the right frequency, to narrow down the right window to reach back through. Months, probably, maybe longer. And he'd wonder, in that careful sideways way he'd learned to think about it, what had kept a version of himself in that building for that long? What kind of hope, or what kind of desperation, would make a person stay in a place like that? What you would have to believe, or have forgotten how not to believe to keep trying. He didn't let himself wonder about the breathing, about how long it had been standing in that hallway before he turned around, about whether the thing that walked out the front door of Relay Station 7 that night had left everything behind it, or whether some part of what had been learning him, quietly and patiently in the dark, had found a way to come along for the ride. He didn't wonder about that. Most nights he almost managed to stop. But sometimes, when he's driving late at night, late enough that the roads are empty and the only sound is the engine, he hears something, just for a moment, between the hum of the tires and the whisper of the wind. A voice, speaking his name in a frequency only he can hear, and Marcus grips the steering wheel a little tighter, and he does not look in the rearview mirror, because he's learned something too, something the thing learned from him. Curiosity is the thing that kills you, not the cat, just curiosity. And tonight, as every night, Marcus drives on, wondering if the passenger seat beside him is really empty, or if it learned a long time ago how to be invisible.